on 188.
Yeah, so I'm on 188, and that's what's on the screen right now.
Good.
And so we go ahead and get started. I just barely pressed record. So
Okay.
we're ready to go. So everyone that's not on could get caught up with the recording.
Okay, good. So we're on slide 189. And so I just need to review real quick what we just finished. Okay, we just finished looking at slides on the actual sign of the conception of Christ and of Gabriel's annunciation to Mary. So, okay, so we will go on. We'll start on slide 189. We've already talked in earlier slides about the day of Jesus' baptism. When we studied the sacred round, we talked about it was on the day 13 water, which is incredibly appropriate, like the best possible day, because the water symbolizes a cleansing, a purification. And 13 is, anyway, that was good. And it's on 0 prime on the Venus calendar, which is the very perfect day for rebirth or baptism. So those two were just bullseyes. Now we're looking at Jubilee calendar, and it's on the great day. It's called the great day of the feast in Scripture. John refers to when Jesus came to the temple. Oh, and I think it's when he cured somebody at the waters. And it said he came on the great day of the feast. That is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. And I also call it great day, partly because it's shorter than saying end of Feast of Tabernacles. And it also symbolizes it's actually the greater day than the beginning of Tabernacles. In Passover, the first day, Passover, is the big day. And the last day of Passover it's a holy day, but not as much happens then. Whereas the great day, a lot of things happen, and this is one of them. So this is. I also note here that it was in the year water in the week of grain, but the point is that the year was water. So it's the water year, and it's the great day of the feast. There's the Day of Atonement on the Hebrew calendar. That's how we first figured out what the day is, because that's the day that John would be preaching to a big group of people who were all off of work, because that's the holiest day of the Hebrew year. If I haven't said that before, Moses was given 7 holy days to celebrate. 6 of them were feast days, like Passover and Tabernacles. The 7th one is a fast day. It was the most holy. It's kind of like 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. So the Day of Atonement was a fast day and the most holy day of the year, and the day to reconcile with God. So again, every time we look at a new calendar, bing, 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 they all line up. And this is where the testimony, the witness that we have the date of the baptism correct, is when all of these calendars, especially when the Jubilee calendar lines up, because that divides the year into 7 parts, which is really rare to have that work out with the other ones that divide it into 4 and 12. Okay, that's a long time on that one, but it's worth it. The day of his baptism is one of the most holy days in history. Okay, next slide, number 190. So on this one, this is when he gives the Bread of Life sermon. And that's on a Sunday morning. And it will it was, oh, this is the double year of grain. He's doing bread. So I'm making a point that this is in the week of grain and in the year of grain on the Jubilee calendar, and then it's on the day of Passover. MPP, M stands for the meridian, that week of the mid-year feast, and P is the first week of that, and it's only a week long, and P is the first day, plant. So MPP, after a while, you just memorize that MPP means Passover. It's a strange notation, but it's very short. And it was Easter on 3 different calendars: the Hebrew, the Uniform Hebrew, and the Uniform Enoch, Sunday mornings. So there's another time where they line up. So that's the scripture tells us that it was basically at the time of Passover, during Passover week, and Easter is almost always during it's the Sunday during Passover week. Okay, number 190. Now we go to the Transfiguration. We've already talked about that before too. It being on 13 lights, and that's when Jesus showed so much light. So on the sacred round, just like 13 water was baptism, 13 light is Transfiguration. On the Venus, it's not quite it's a holy day, but it's not a bingo match. It's on 0 adult. But Tabernacles is a giveaway match on the Enoch, because remember the 3, Peter, James, and John, who were the 3 apostles or disciples at that time, wanted to build tabernacles for Moses and Elijah and Jesus, and they were from Galilee, and their calendar, I'm not sure how much they used the Enoch calendar, because on the Hebrew calendar it was not tabernacles, it was Day of Atonement, as shown in the slide. In any case, it was again the great day of the feast, just as it had been on the baptism. Oh, by the way, on the Jubilee calendar, that's the last day of the year. E is the end time week party, P is the first week, and O is the last day of that week. So the day after EPO is PPP, the plant, the first day of the next year. So that's not true on the Hebrew. In the Hebrew calendar, the Feast of Tabernacles is the end of it's on the 22nd of a month. It's not. Anyway, these are all very different calendars. Okay, slide 192. Now we get a whole new thing going on here. The Virgin Mary. I don't think we've talked about her death date before this slide. So I've got articles on this, on the Virgin Mary, on her birth and death dates. And that article was written when I discovered that they actually have, down at the bottom of this slide, it says, in Avalon, Britannia, the Roman name for it at that time, which was renamed Glastonbury, England, actually has church records there that date back to AD 48. Talk about old records. And it has her death date. When I found that, again, I said, wow, when I'm given a year, I can usually find the exact date, especially with a superstar like, forgive the familiarity there, but like the Virgin Mary, she's going to have a major death date. And it was wholly on about 8 calendars, but we have referred to it before on slide 168, I remember now. So we have talked about it before, but in any case, she dies there in Avalon, September 26, AD 48. She only came in AD 44. The death of James, also called Jacobus, the apostle, Peter, James, and John, was in April of AD 44 by Herod Agrippa when he first came in. And he was going to start in June of 44. He rounded up a bunch of the top saints and I think he was going to execute all of them. And anyway, it wasn't looking good for them because he was winning points with the Jews for killing the Christians. And they didn't want to kill them all, so they did a thing back then which is interesting. Put them in a boat, sent them out to sea with no oars and no food, assuming that they would die, but they always could say, well, we didn't kill them. If God wanted them to live, he could have saved them. Well, God did want them to live, and he did save them. And Joseph of Arimathea was in the boat, and he was a tin trader and knew the way to the tin mines in England really well. That's what he did. And the story goes, the boats that landed in Africa where they got supplies and sails, and then he knew the way, and he dropped off Mary Magdalene and some of those in France at Marseille, and he and Virgin Mary go on to Avalon. And he had been commissioned by Philip, the apostle. Philip had commissioned him to start a church in Avalon, and he did that. So anyway, she was there 4 years. And anyway, the point of the slide is the day she passed away was the very last day of a Jubilee. The last year of a Jubilee is Olive, and then the last day is the end period, first week, and the last day of Olive. So she passed away at the very end of a Jubilee, and it's also a great day, I think. So there you go. That's her death date in England. Okay, next slide, 193. This is another day, this was the key to the first calendar we looked at was the priest calendar. This day is a wonderful day for dating because Josephus, an eyewitness to this, and who had already, I think, by that time defected to the Roman side, which, thank goodness, because he wrote a whole history of everything that happened. He wasn't killed. And he gives the exact day, not on our calendar, but he gives it on the Hebrew calendar as the 10th day of Ab. And he gives the year. It's the year is well known, AD 70. And he gives that it was the first day of the priest cycle. So before we used that day to lock in the priest cycle, and then by looking up the day on the Hebrew calendar in AD 70, you can get Sunday, 3rd of August. And he said it was a Sunday, so that's great because that's another witness that it's correct. And now this is where it really fits, because on the Hebrew calendar it looked like it was a day off. The day they celebrate the burning is the 9th of Ab. Not celebrate, they have a day of mourning and fasting. And you say, well, why do they celebrate on the 9th of Ab when the temple was burned on the 10th? And the answer partly is, well, the 9th of Ab is a Saturday, and it's just what the holy day is. It's not a mistake. That's the holy day on the Hebrew calendar. But on the Jubilee calendar, which has a whole, I'm going to tell you a little more here. You guys get the bonus stuff. That's what you signed up for. That's when you have a whole week called the burning. And on the first day of the week, it's always on a Sunday. And the burning was on a Sunday. And it was on 0 Lord on the Venus, 0 Death, Mercury, and 1 Chief. But the big day here, that's a bingo, that's a perfect match. Lord Death kind of fits. Lord Death fits very well, but Lord and Chief don't fit all that well. But Josephus makes a big point. He says, wow, the original temple back in 586 with Nebuchadnezzar was also burned on the 10th day of Ab, and he's really impressed with that. Well, back then, the 10th day of Ab was also the burning, and it's way on a different day. I think it's the 24th of July, and it's a couple of weeks different on our calendar, but on the Jubilee calendar, it is the day of burning again. So that's two witnesses. The temple is burned twice, and both times on the burning. Now the bonus stuff. That's in my regular papers. The bonus is the details of what should be done during the week of burning. Is there's of all the tribes of Israel, if you count them right, you get 14 because Ephraim and Manasseh split up, and there's actually 14 different ones that you can count different ways. Anyway, they had two people that were supposed to bring the wood. There was a ceremony of burning during that week. And two tribes were supposed to bring the wood for the burning sacrifice during that time. Guess who the two tribes were on the first day? They are Levi, the priests who were on duty that day, one chief at the temple, and Judah, the Jews, who's really what the burning was all about. So even that detail of who got the firewood for the burning was just a perfect match. So all of these things, this is all a witness to the foreknowledge of God. Let's go to the next slide. And the next slide, wait a minute, somehow my machine is not going there when I push the button. There it goes. Pardon me. Okay, 194. Oh, this is where I point out Solomon's temple was burned on the same day, and it was on the day of burning. So we already have discussed 194. Let's go to 195. Now, one more on Solomon's temple. I told you before that at the end well, this is fulfilling the one we talked about a little bit when I was saying how the intercalation is done on the Jubilee calendar. The last week, instead of being just 1 week of the end of the year, they extend to 2 weeks. So here I've got, what we're going to do now is actually get the dates of Solomon's temple, which is a big thing to get. There's been a lot of different scholars come up with different dates. The Bible tells you the exact year in which the construction starts. It was the 480th year of the Exodus. And that's where you count inclusively, where the day they left on the Exodus is called the first day of the first year. They don't have a 0th year. And so actually it's 479 years after the Exodus then. Almost no Bible scholars believe that. They think they know roughly when the temple was built, but they think the Exodus was around 1200 instead of 1400 BC because of Egyptian foolishness. And so almost nobody takes the Bible seriously. I took it seriously and figured they can count the 480th year and everything fit into place. So it turned out it was 983 BC, which year we've given before in slide 110, and completed in 976. The temple is dedicated not in the year immediately after it's completed. I'm not sure why. The Bible doesn't say the year, but when I did the research, it's almost 4 years after the completion that it's dedicated. I think it had to do with finishing the furnishings and the inside. but it was dedicated on the Feast of Tabernacles, which is appropriate. It's a tabernacle. It's like a temple building representing a body. And that day happened to also be the equinox on the Enoch calendar. See, it's Saturday the 19th, which goes into, well, that's on the equinoxes are always on a Saturday on the Enoch calendar, near the 20th of September. It's on the Day of Atonement, which is a perfect fit, really, reconciliation with God. And it was at it's dedicated, the 2-week, it's a 2-week dedication. And at the end of the 2 weeks, it was tabernacles on the Enoch calendar instead of the Hebrew. And it was the great day after 2 weeks of a festival. And we talked about that earlier. It is now, well, let's do one more slide. We got to go to slide 196. Now we're going to go to the birth of Solomon, the birth of David, and then I think we're ready to quit for today on this. So King Solomon's birth is given because it talks about what year it was when he started, what year of his reign it was when he started the temple. So it's easy to get the year once you have the temple. And he's born on Tuesday, the 26th of June, which is 1 Tammuz. That is the day that's like the first day of summer. See, 26th of June is near 21st. But on the Hebrew, it has to be lined up with the moon. So 1st of Tammuz, which is the same as Judah's birthday. It's 1 resurrection on Venus, which is the same as his father David's birthday, which we haven't, I don't think, looked at yet. And it's 1 monkey, and that'll be the same as John the Baptist. I don't understand all of the 1 monkey symbolism, but it's got something to do with priesthood and ruling. I don't associate with kings as much as high priests, or the priests anyway. And Solomon died. The picture here is the famous story of where there's 2 babies and 2 mothers, each claiming to be the mother. And this is where his wisdom was first shown. He was only 25 years old. And, he's made the king. And the king, is the executive and the judicial and the legislative all in one. So he's the judge. And when he performed that judgment, everybody said, wow, this is a wise man. And we're not going to worry about a 25-year-old kid being king now. He's amazing. Of course, the Lord said he'd be the wisest man that would ever live as far as what wisdom is, which is knowing how to make judgments as well as other things. Solomon died in 17th of May, 945, on first fruits on the Hebrew calendar. 1 death. Now there's another perfect bingo on the sacred round. 1 skull is the day for death. And 1 death on Venus, which is only once in a year and 1.6 years. So to get those 2 together, as I recall, it's 1 day and 32 years to have the death day on Venus coincide with 1 skull. And it's also 1 fullness on Mercury, 1 quickening on UV, and 1 prophet on P. So, I mean, that's holy on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days. And those are mostly the 6 we've looked at. I think it's holy on even more. So even though he messed up at the end of his life and it went bad, still dies on a lot of really holy days. Okay, we now passed, well, let's just really quick on David because they're set, and then we'll go to a new place next week. So King David is born on the 4th of July, which is a decision day. And see, his life is all about a big thing with Bathsheba is a big decision. So he's born on a decision day on Holy Calendar. One birth Mercury, Easter, one arise on the priest, resurrection on Venus, tabernacles, one deer. One deer was the day of the fall of Adam, and so, or the fall of mortality, when mortality begins. But see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 major holy days. And then he dies on 1 Tammuz. Now that's the same as Solomon, his son. We've seen over and over that somebody will often die on the day their son is born. And if you think about the implications just of that, of being a common pattern, it shows that days of death are known ahead. His son's born first on 1 Tammuz. And now he didn't die in battle. He died from sickness, so that's not surprising. But, you know, Joseph Smith's death date, here he is martyred in the prison. It's on the same day as his mother is born. It's the same pattern over and over. So that death date was written in the stars. Even though he was commanded, anyway, it's tricky. You think about this, and the Lord knows ahead everything that's going to happen, just like the Bible says, and it's witnessed by these calendars. Anyway, it's one creation, which is exactly, we've talked about a 40-year cycle is a Venus cycle, and he starts his reign on one creation and he dies on one creation. So his reign was exactly 40 years on the Venus calendar, and it's one death. So there is David and Solomon, and we will stop there, 197 today, and go on from there next week. So I will open it up for questions. And again, I haven't got the chat in front of me.
But I could read it to you, John.
Read me a question.
Yeah, so Russell stated, I noticed that slide 168 discusses different calendars than 192 on the death of Virgin Mary. So if you go to
let me go to 168, because it referenced 168. So I will go to that and see what we got. Because I don't always, no, that's 169. There it is. Yeah, I don't always, I can only cram so much on one slide. So yes, these aren't different dates. It's just trumpets on the Hebrew calendar. I don't think that was on the one we looked at tonight. Resurrection, adult, one storm. The point is, we can go back and forth between them, but I don't think there's a disagreement. One thing that's on 168 is the uniform Hebrew calendar, which is really slick because, I mean, that's an entirely different calendar. And these line up with those other women. When on 169, it talks about how it ties into Rachel and Leah and Rebecca and Miriam. And when I made the picture for 169, I didn't even know about Heshbon. So I actually went back and changed the heading on this one, and I threw in the one Heshbon because it wasn't in the picture, and I didn't want to do the picture again. But anyway, yes. So she's really, I told you, she's really dies on lots of different calendars. Let me see if I can remember these, and I'll go look at tonight's, and maybe Russell can see if any of them are actually different, any on the same calendar if I have different dates. So I'm going to go back to tonight's now, which was something like 190.
It was 192.
Yeah, 192. Oh, yeah. So what this slide is saying is, in addition, the reason I say C168, because I can't fit it all on one slide. So this one is just adding one more date that we didn't know about back then. It's saying, by the way, it's also in a Jubilee year, the last year of a Jubilee, and it's also on this holiday in addition to all of those other dates. That's why I say go back and look at that old slide. So she died on lots of holy days. And there's even more that there's star days we haven't looked at yet. Does that answer the question okay? I hope.
Sure. I just was pointing it out. I didn't mean to be critical or anything. I just thought it was interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, I appreciate you pointing it out because, yeah, when you do go back to 168, I mean, it's all those other ones plus the Jubilee. And then, like I said, when you add the stars in, the way this whole network works is of testimonies is a witness. I mean, I didn't even know about these calendars when I discovered the first ones. I didn't know about the Jubilee calendar. And so each time a new calendar is discovered, on my side, I'm saying, oh my goodness, it's also a holiday on this calendar, which is very different. And so, yeah, she's really a major figure and tied to so many other women. And then we've talked about tied to Christ. Anyway, okay, other questions?
So there's another question too. Are any calendars, or is there any way to tie calendars to dispensations? I think those are a little bit more tricky.
Yeah, I'll be telling you a hot discovery of this week that I may write a paper on and I may not. Well, here's one. First of all, one I've already written on Mars. The Mars calendar is the orbit of Mars is, we haven't looked at it yet in this series, but just looking ahead, the orbit of Mars is so close to 780 days, which is 3 sacred rounds. It's 779 and something like 57/63. You know, really close to 780. The time it takes for that error, that tiny error, to amount to 13 whole days to insert an extra or to skip a Trecina, it's somewhere around 700 years. So when you look at exactly when should those Trecinas be inserted, there's a paper on that, my most recent one on the Mars calendar. It turns out that you can see a pattern where it does tie to dispensations. And you can see why in that paper I proposed a leader. In fact, I think even a leader and 2 counselors for each of those. So they're not like a usual dispensation of the gospel, but it's like it's some kind of a dispensation, and it's some kind of an epoch or time period during which the gospel is preached, and different people are in charge. And as I recall, not only is Joseph Smith in charge of one, but Martin Luther is the head man that I proposed to be over one because of when he lived. And the actual lengths they're never almost ever all the same when the Lord does it. He loves variation, and I think they vary from 300 years to well over 700. And now let me tell you the new one this week. This is tricky, but I'll still try. On the star calendar, the thing that everybody knows about and that Denver has talked about in his lectures, and he gave me the clue on how to do it, is ages like the age of Aquarius, age of Pisces, age of Aries, when the sun enters into a new constellation on the first day of spring, if you ask what stars are hidden behind the brightness of the sun on the first day of spring, back in the time of Adam, it was in Taurus, and later in Aries, and later in Pisces, and pretty soon, actually even now, in the age of Aquarius. That is well known and hasn't seemed too much tied to religious things, except for the most recent age of Aquarius. And that, from all I can tell, starts, and it's in that article, it starts when the Savior comes to the Kirtland Temple in 18, and he quotes it. He talks about Aquarius in 1836 when he comes to accept the Kirtland Temple. And he came suddenly to the temple, which means surprisingly. And he talks about Aquarius. That was one reason I was fighting to have Section 110 kept in the Doctrine and Covenants, because it was clear. He's quoting, he said, this is the beginning of the pouring out of blessings. And that's what Aquarius does. He pours out blessings. Oh, pouring out blessings onto the heads of my saints. And Aquarius is pouring out blessings, or the river, onto the heads of the fish. That one ties in. But when you look at all of the others, it hasn't been as obvious. Okay, now the new thing from this week is there's another kind of age tied to those same stars. But it's not when the first day of the year at the equinox enters into the sun. It's when the 15th day does. I can't say it very quickly, but the holy days of the stars, they have days like Passover. And yeah, I can say it. If a person can't explain it to the layman, he doesn't understand it. It's a pretty good rule. And I believe I understand it. The way Passover is done is Passover is the 15th of the first month, and it cannot happen before the spring equinox. If it were to happen before the spring equinox, you add an extra month to the Hebrew calendar and push it up so it's never before. It can be on or after, but never before. And we use the same rule, by the way, for Easter. Easter is the first Sunday after the equinox, which is on or after. It's the first Sunday after the first full moon, on or after the spring equinox. A little detail of the on or after is the key. All right, the Passover in the stars is on the 15th of the first month, that is on or after the spring equinox on the Enoch calendar. That's it. That's complicated enough, I might write a whole paper on it. I hinted at that in an earlier paper, but I wasn't sure until just recently, like last week. That changes those ages totally. The first age is not Taurus, it's Gemini, the year before, the constellation after Taurus. It's the 10th instead of the 9th constellation. And from before Adam, the whole history of mankind is basically 3.5 of these zodiac ages. So the first ones is all Taurus, all of Aries, all of Pisces, and then half of Aquarius. This one starts out with a half. There's a half age, and it ends. All of this is to show you when it ends. It ends right at the death of Adam. The whole time from Adam up, I mean, it's basically the year of his death. And that is an age of, I call it a feast age of Gemini, where Passover was on the 15th day of the Gemini constellation. And then right at that time, it switches. And from the time of Enoch, and from the death of Adam, all the way up to Lehi, to 600 BC, is all the age of Taurus on the feast days. And then from 600 BC, and it's practically the day, Lehi leaves on Passover, 600 BC. And that is where it switches to the age of Aries on the feast days. And it goes all through the time of Christ up to 1700. I was amazed at how far. My paper, I was guessing and I guessed wrong. It goes all the way. You see, they're around 2,300 years for an age. So 600 BC to 1700 AD is 300. Oh yeah, 2,300. It's right on, 2,300. Oh, yeah, it's really 2150. So it's a little long, 2,300 years, but that's what it was. So right with the birth of Joseph Smith Sr. in 1770 something AD, and right with the birth of our country, it's a whole new age. And that's just the starting of the age of Pisces, and it's going to go through the end of the millennium. And so the 3.5, or the half is at the first, Gemini, and then Taurus, Aries, and Pisces. That is news. That's hot off the press. I'm not sure if I'm going to write a paper on it or not, because I've hinted at it enough. I don't know what I'll do. Okay, anyway, that all has to do with, yes, dispensations of different kinds are in different calendars, but they're not always what you expect. If you want the 7 dispensations of 7 angels, we already did. The best one was on the Jubilee calendar, where there's 7 1,000-year periods. But that doesn't match the actual prophets as much as it does 7,000 years. So I'm not even sure if I've answered the question. Let me turn it back. Did that answer what people wanted?
That answered it from my perspective, yeah.
But I hope you do write the paper on the zodiac alignment. That would be very interesting.
Oh, good. All I need is a little encouragement that somebody would think it's interesting. Because I've written so many on the stars and how they work, but it's pretty complicated. And that can be a short paper, because it boils down to that simple concept of, you look in the sky on the 15th day of a star month, and is it before or after the spring equinox? That's the whole thing. That's the whole paper. But the implications are everything else, all the other words I said. Okay, it's about 1:45. Is there a quick question, or should we end right here?
There's one quick question too. According to calendars, is the millennium going to be 1,000 years, or is it going to be a different orientation of time? Can we identify that with any calendar?
Yes, I think it's really pretty well nailed down. When you count 1,000-year periods, Section 77 of the Doctrine and Covenants talks about, or anyway, in some places, I think that's one, they talk about 7,000 years plus a little season. That little season's something like 200 years, and it's a little different on every calendar. The full age is around 7,200 years. There's a calendar I've never even done, and on the Venus calendar, on the big cycles, and this is the one that Lehi leaves. Lehi leaves exactly 600 BC. I mean, on the day, or 601. If you count like an astronomer, it's 600. But anyway, 601 if you use the BC method to Christ at 1 BC. 12 of those periods, and they're called hours. When the Lord talks about an hour and half an hour, he might be referring to the Venus calendar, which has 12 hours on it of 600 years each, and 6 times 12 is 7,200 years. So on that one, it comes out even of 7,200 years. we looked at the Jubilee calendar, and each of the ages is 1,029 years. You do 7 of those, and you get about 7,200. I think it's 7,203. Somebody can multiply 7 times 1029. As I recall, it's something like it's 7,203 years. I mean, so on that one, it comes out 7,200 again, roughly. So they're slightly different on different calendars. But if you do the one that's 1,000 years, then you have to add a little season at the end because it's longer than that. So, and the seals are 7 seals, I think, are, well, I don't know the seals. I've never written a paper on 7 seals because I don't understand them. Or earthquakes or when all that stuff is. So each calendar has, oh, and they all have different beginning places. And they all have different ending places. Just one sentence on the beginning places and then we're done. Just think of what we've already seen at the beginning. There's a day Adam is either born or created, however you want to think of Adam coming, breathing. I call it the day Adam breathed the first time. There's a day when he eats forbidden fruit, and that's the beginning of the age on one of the calendars. There's a day he's judged, he and Eve are judged by the Lord, and that's the beginning day on one calendar. On the main Hebrew calendar, there's a day when they're expelled from the Garden of Eden, and on the Hebrew calendar, that's the beginning of mortality. In fact, for actual mortality, that's the day. But see, other stuff happened before mortality. I mean, that's just one event. So see, each of those different calendars had a different, like, beginning day. That's really important. It turns out that most of the planetary calendars begin at mortality. So Venus, both Venus calendars and both Mercury calendars are lined up on one creation on the day they're expelled from the garden. So the most of them line up when mortality starts. They also all end on different days. And so I don't know what happens on each of them. That's a surprise, but I believe something's going to happen on the end of each of the calendars. So the Lord's got lots of options, lots of secrecy of when things are going to happen. But the bottom line is, it's the whole shebang is about 7,200 years. It's not 8,000. Some of the LDS presidents have suggested that a little season is 1,000 years, and it's really 8,000. No, that's a full season is 1,000 years. It's a little season. Anyway, that's not true. They do that because they want the meridian of time to be after 4,000 years and have it at the halfway point. But it's not how it works. 4,000 is the meridian of time out of 7. You just have to know how to do the math. There are days that cannot be divided. If you can't divide a day, where is half of 7? It's either at 3 or 4, and it turns out it's at 4. So there you go. All righty. Tune in next week, and we will continue from there.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.